Hey guys, today I am talking with Dr. Martha Eddy. And you already know she's awesome because her name is Martha, which is the same name of the mother of both Bruce Wayne and Clark Kent. But not only that, Dr. Martha Eddy is a pioneer in the somatic movement. She has written the book Mindful Movement, The Evolution of the Somatic Arts and Conscious Action, and the book Dynamic Embodiment of the Sun Salutation. She is also the founder and director of the Dynamic Embodiment Somatic Movement Therapy Training Program, and she is the co-founder and director of programming and research at Movement for Life. She is a super brilliant lady, and she is here to talk about how awesome the body is and how we are made to move. Thanks for listening, everyone. Pull up a chair and buckle up. It's the Original Strength BodCast. Martha, you're kind of like a founding mother of the somatics movement. So what is somatic awareness and why is it important?
Great question. I actually wrote a book that kind of maps out what the different kind of founding sources are of somatics. And so I don't really lay claim to the beginning of the field, but I do lay claim to helping promote the field. And I do think I'm one of the first people to use the word somatic awareness, somatic process. I'm sure other people were using it too. I did not create the term that I love, which is somanaut. I did create the word, but someone else was using it somewhat differently, ecosomatics. So I'll speak to what soma is and then specifically what somatic awareness is.
Sounds good.
Okay, so my understanding from both speaking with people that are from Greece and from what I've read of Thomas Hanna, and I've also met him, is that soma represents the living body. So if you go to Greece, you might talk about the body that you have to deal with after your death with a different word than when you're just talking about your actual living, healing, self-regulating body. And that's the soma. The soma is the living body. So somatic awareness is becoming aware, usually sensorially, like with your inner perception of the sensations of the body. And with that, I believe it's also mining the body for body wisdom, for not just ideas, but a kind of sensitizing to what is going on and what the needs are. Like, what exactly does my body say I need? Like rest, or food, or more subtly to stand up and arch my back, or curl over and hang my head. So those are some examples of what somatic awareness brings.
How would cultivating somatic awareness help a person like in their day-to-day life?
So the premise is that if we bring awareness to our somatic experiences, our somatic processes, that it kind of encourages them along. It's like, I don't know, sort of looking in the mirror and going, oh, I forgot to brush my hair. There's this kind of interactive resonance that happens when our body feels listened to, just like we feel better if someone listens to us or observes and acknowledges that we exist.
What you got there?
Well, I got a hold of the book, Mindful Movement, The Evolution of the Somatic Arts and Conscious Action. And it's been a very poignant time because the whole somatic field is given its due from, and by the way, I like that somatic movement work, which is sort of where it first gets named, can be applied to creative arts because many of the people who founded them were creative artists, to science and research, and also to fitness, which of course kind of came later, but there's a piece in the history of somatic movement that starts not totally, but one other starting point is in Europe. And that one is called like the movement cure, physical culture. These are some of the words that were happening even in the 1700s, but definitely in the 18 and 1900s, whereby people were doing exercise to be more as a kind of antidote to the beginning of what we call leisure or sedentary lifestyle. So a true progenitor or influence or source for somatic activity, somatic processes, somatic movement, somatic um, body work, possibly, would be really the indigenous cultures that stayed holistic and have always had a body mind connection. There's another principle in somatics, which is really important, and that is the term Thomas Hanna, the philosopher who knew about the Greek word soma, gave to these disparate movement, I could call them techniques, approaches, systems that were coming up at the turn of the 20th century. That would be the Alexander technique, the Feldenkrais technique, the Laban method, the Bartenieff work. Some people go back to people like Dalcroze and Delsarte. So as you can hear, a lot of European names. One of the things I did was start to source out how did they get into this work? And I kept noticing that one had studied yoga, another had done Aikido, somebody else was a judo master. And I started to, as I was saying before, map out those kind of correlations as well. So I wrote an article from presentation, I think I did in 1999 or 2000, called The Global Influences on Somatics. And that was looking at really the indigenous cultures of the global south and of Asia. And now more and more we can look at what's even very much present in the native peoples of the Americas, who have been working kind of very holistically forever.
So speaking of Aikido and yoga, and I'm guessing Somanaut is like an astronaut, somebody that's a pioneer in somatics and a practicer. How did you become a Somanaut?
So it's an honor to be called one. And just to say, I think it also has something to do with going out into outer space, literally, like using these concepts to wake up your consciousness. That's another piece of what a somatic awareness is. It's in the professional association that most of us belong to is META, the International Somatic Movement Education and Therapy Association. We are looking at conscious movement. So becoming aware of movement, but we also, many of us believe that movement brings consciousness. So there's a kind of shift in brain state as we enter into this world. And I can say that that's a big part of my first experience with somatic work. I was already a dancer, wasn't really an athlete. I mean, I played a little tennis. I loved basketball. There was a certain amount of sports I was doing. I did jog some, but it was mostly kind of with the intention to dance, like what is going to keep me healthy and strong. And so with the advent of being exposed myself first to something called Laban movement analysis and the related work, because the person who brought Rudolf Laban's work to the United States was Irmgard Bartenieff. And she became a physical therapist that developed a lot of exercises based in very rich principles of human movement and human efficiency. So I got trained in both of those by my college teacher. So I began my Somanaut career as an undergrad. And it turns out she happened to be neighbors with another, I want to say, magician but a scientist, researcher, occupational therapist, genius named Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen. And as it turns out, I didn't find out until about 3 years into studying with Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen that she had actually studied with Irmgard Vartanian. So that also got me interested in history. It's like, oh, when do people talk about things and when do they sort of kind of reinvent them themselves, and when who did what and how did they influence each other? But the fact that I was studying with two different geniuses at the same time, because I actually did then go and study directly with Irmgard Vartanian, and she was 78. Maybe I met her a
Wow.
little bit before that, but yeah. And she taught me how to jump and fall at the age of 79. So that was pretty impressive to me.
Wow. That's awesome. And it's
Yeah,
quite the
I was
pedigree.
scared. I was actually scared of falling. Like you do this fall where you go straight to the floor face down, like following a diagonal pathway. You jump up, back, and high, and you go down the opposite diagonal and you just slide. And it's actually not bad. But when you look at it, you're going, am I going to smash my face? You know, you're not catching with your two hands. And it's really about how you fold your knee and land and then slide on your arm. And I don't think, maybe I had even done some Aikido at that point. I knew how to roll on my arm, but I had never kind of done a slide down my arm. So pretty impressive to have her demonstrate it, do it, and then teach it to me. And I was like 60 years younger than her.
So if somatic awareness is being aware and listening to your body and what it needs, when you're trying to learn a diagonal jump and falling down to your face, what's screaming more, your body or your mind telling you what it
It's the
wants?
mind. It's definitely the mind going, I can't do this, blah, 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 you know? And then I don't think this happened with her because I was a pretty proficient dance technician. So I could observe pretty well already. But the beauty of what she teaches and how she taught is that if someone was having a problem, she knew exactly how to describe each element of the movement in every phase of it, because that's what Laban movement analysis does. It is a language that is actually a philosophy, that is actually a framework for describing every movement, breaking it up into like sentences so that you look at the beginning, the middle, and the end until you're able to either talk about it if that's all you want to do, or perform it, or change it if you need to adapt it for somebody. And that's a big thing that I do in my work.
So I guess that helps you also become a very good witnesser or observer of movement.
Correct. Correct. So we have courses in movement observation. And it's actually why I chose to leave college for a little bit, take a pause, and go study with her. And then after I graduated from college, I I decided to just go study with her and do her 1 year certification program because I knew she was 78 years old and this would be a good time. And it was just the right time to do it. I had to quit a job that I had with young children. And I'll never forget one of the kids, I'm telling them, I'm not going to be your teacher anymore. And one of them raises, and I said, I'm going to be studying with an old lady. And the little kid raised her hand. I said, yeah, what's your question? She goes, is she going to die? You know, they're so blunt. It's like, oh, she's old and you're going to teach with her now. Is she going to die? I said, I don't know, but I'm glad I'm going to go study with her now. And she lived about 3 more years. So I got to study.
Wow. That's awesome. So if the indigenous cultures have more of a somatic connection with themselves, body and mind and soul and spirit, do you think it's because they move more or they have dance as part of their, part of their way of life, or why do modern cultures or the rest of us, why do we have that disconnect?
So there's a lot in there. We could speak the rest of this talk all about that. I have a colleague named Amber McZeal who has really made it her, well, at least her current research to be looking at what we call, where she has named decolonizing the psyche and decolonizing somatics. And she has really this view, for instance, that I shared of how when people started to do movement kind of more rigorously, but actually separate from the cultural norm, it was because as Western Europeans, they had kind of the diseases of privilege, as I mentioned, like sitting too much and being royalty and maybe getting lower back problems even in the 18 and 1900s, or overeating and getting clogged intestines, or all these kinds of things. Um, so not to say that there weren't other kinds of diseases that were still very serious, and some of the early somatic progenitors that I identify are really more in the late 1800s, early 1900s, and they were dealing with illnesses like tuberculosis. So getting back to the indigenous cultures, I think it's both. I think certainly it's because they move more, lifestyle, they dance, it's embedded in it. And to me, that's a key, um, just thinking for the right word, a key facet is that it's embedded in the philosophy that the body is important, that movement is important, that we come together in movement, we make decisions in movement. So it's not just dance as recreation, for instance, but dance to prepare for war, or movement activity to get the work done. So everything is a lot more integrated. And the meaning, therefore, is a lot more kind of evident just in everyday life because you're in a community doing it together.
Awesome. You created something called Dynamic Embodiment. Can you speak a little bit about that?
Sure. So I learned from these two amazing teachers, Irmgard Bartenieff, who founded the Laban Institute of Movement Studies, and then we since renamed it the Laban Bartenieff Institute of Movement Studies before she died, so she knew that. And so that system, Laban Bartenieff Movement Studies, and what she developed, the whole curriculum around Laban's work called Laban Movement Analysis, is a 1 year or 500-hour training program. And I taught on that certification faculty, either during the year or on the weekends or in the summers. And then, so I think I mentioned to you that I went down to New York. I left Massachusetts and I went down to New York to study with Irmgard Bartenieff. And then just as I was doing that, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen decided to create a certification program also. And I'd been studying with her every summer for already, I'd say, 4 years. And so when I heard there was a certification, I was like, I guess I really want to finish that as well. So I went back to Massachusetts for a year-long program. The reason I'm bringing this up is that I then went on to become a faculty member in that program as well. So I was either teaching in New York during the kind of year, the winter, spring, summer, and then in the summer I would go to Massachusetts, or I would alternate and I would teach in the year long in Massachusetts. There were only 2 year-long programs that happened. I believe one was 82, which is the one that I wasn't in but joined in at the end to graduate, and then there was another one in like 1986. And so when I was teaching up there, then I would teach in New York at the Laban Bartenieff Institute of called Laban Institute of Movement Studies at the other time. So long story short, here I am teaching in these two different certification programs, and I've already, just by the nature of having studied both of them, begun to see their interconnections, see that they're, in my estimation, they're two sides of the same coin, or a glove and hand kind of fit, just perfect for each other. Both of them are really more, as I mentioned, frameworks and philosophies than they are a system of techniques. And yet both have some movement, I call movement rituals. So Bartenieff made up 6 basic exercises that are needed to walk efficiently. And Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen created a piece of what I call choreography, which is a sequence of movements replicating what a baby goes through to come to sitting. And now we have, different systems like primal moves and different kind of animal moves, strengthening programs. And I've been saying this for 40 years. It's like, well, if you want to push around 100 pounds, why aren't you moving your own body weight? And then obviously you can add more to it. But if you get on the ground and you're using your arms for crawling, or if you're just pushing yourself up to standing, or you're lowering yourself down, we all know the benefits of push-ups, then you're basically doing baby movement. Babies do that in order to gain not just strength, that's part of it, but also postural alignment in a very dynamic kind of balancing of the muscular tone. And as it turns out in the body mind centering work, we believe all of these different positionings in relationship to gravity stimulate the organs and the hormonal glands, the endocrine system, which brings us back to that first book you were asking about. So Dynamic Embodiment of the Sun Salutation is basically using my system of dynamic embodiment, which merges both the body mind centering and the Laban-Bartenieff studies to look at how to occupy space with what is often called in our work biotensegrity. And that's a term that Steve Levin came up with. Bartenieff was already aware of tensegrity because she was influenced by Buckminster Fuller. She was very excited about these internal dynamic forces as someone who had studied not just movement and kinetic chains as a kind of movement scientist, as training as a physical therapist, but also connective tissue massage and understanding how the fascia helps to create these kinetic chains where one muscle is connected to the other and has a through line. And a key term for Bartenieff is connectivity. She created that word. I mean, now there's interconnectivity and internet connectivity, but she was one of the very first to be using that use of the word connect with tivity way back 40, 50 years ago, 50 or 60 years ago at this point.
What does it mean inside of dynamic embodiment? Because I saw this on your website, and it just made me curious. Like, what does it mean to know your body, follow your heart?
Thank you. Yeah, so dynamic embodiment merges the Laban-Bartenieff work together with the body mind centering. And the way I came to the name should say a little bit about that phrase too. So I really believe that the body mind centering work of Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen is one of the most detailed and profound ways to enter into the world of somatic awareness. And one of the things that happens when you engage in somatic awareness is you become more deeply embodied. In other words, you feel your body and you're more aware of it. And so you kind of care about your body. And so when I'm speaking, writing, unfortunately, not as well when I'm on the computer. I tend to get a little disembodied and like cut off different parts of myself. And I might not be thinking all the time about how my feet connect through to my pelvis, connects through to my spinal curves, connects through to my shoulder girdle, connects through to, and this is important in the BMC work, we're also looking at, again, what I said about the babies. Is my heart kind of retreating, which is a Laban word, by the way, like where I'm going in space, or is my heart kind of centrally expanded in the chest cavity? So that's embodiment at the autonomic nervous system level. So BMC, body mind centering, might start you off with classes that are more muscular skeletal, but maybe not. You might go straight into a week on working with the organs, a week on working with the neuroendocrine system, just the nervous system. And what we're doing is feeling the different parts of the brain and noticing how you initiate movement from internal sources. So that's how you can kind of feel and then follow. If you are listening, then you can actually, again, follow the wisdom of that area. So that's the following of the heart.
That's very cool. Also on your website, and this made me curious as well. With dynamic embodiment, you have a combination of social justice and creative movement to relieve stress and balance all aspects of the body and psyche. How does that work?
Well, a lot of stress has to do with injustice. I mean, whether it's a woman that's really frustrated that she can't get above a certain glass ceiling, or whether it's a guy who feels very limited in how he's being treated in terms of maybe people not recognizing he has a sensitive side to himself, or, and boxing him into a macho kind of identity, or whether it's a Black person that is being mistreated just because of the color of his, her, or their skin, or whether it's someone who has chosen a different meaning, different in the current culture, whereas in Native cultures and I mean the First Nation peoples of our country, for instance, to have a love relationship with anybody was considered a good thing. It didn't matter what their gender was. So it's not really a new thing. It's actually to explore or to feel or to allow one's own gender identity to come forth. The whole conversation I could have about.
So is it kind of like creating a safe space for a person to be authentic and to who they are?
Beautifully said. Beautiful. It is. It's about safe space. We call it brave space in our work because you can't guarantee it's going to be safe. There could be the possibility that someone says something that feels hurtful or does something repeatedly that ends up being harmful. But we can all attempt to be respectful and to be brave enough to have these conversations so that we're more aware of them. In a similar way to somatic awareness, we become more aware of our word choices. It's actually what I ended up doing my doctoral research on. I was working with movement, but studying how movement can inform conflict resolution. And I was interested in the body language side of how people get into trouble with each other, like reading body language wrong or bumping into each other by accident. I was working a lot with middle school kids and teenagers, high school kids. And, but there's also this idea that what we say when we're speaking, with what we say with our bodies when we are speaking, also is useful information. So part of somatic awareness is not just when I'm exercising or when I'm dancing, but it's also how I move when I'm communicating verbally. And the Laban work is really brilliant at looking at that carefully and helping politicians, for instance, maybe not be as authentic. You could go the opposite, right? Or you're an actor and you need to create a character. So you could use this work to be inauthentic if you wanted, but the idea is to be as authentic as you can in this other persona. Right. So authenticity is a value system that actually is very strong in the somatic community. I would say this kind of putting on of different behaviors is, in my estimation, and how we work with it in dynamic embodiment, a chance to become empathetic to something different than what your own norm is. So when I try on a new movement behavior, like if I don't usually just kind of go light and free and kind of move my hands in round circles, trying it on just gives me an awareness, number one, that exists, that I'm capable of it, and that I have some associations with it that I become aware of. It actually feels nice on my wrists. When might I talk like that? Oh, if I'm kind of in a more poetic point of view. So just knowing that, it means when I see it in others, I'm going, that's like the poetic side of me. I don't see that I might have a judgment. Like, I don't see that that's going to help them get the job done, because that's sort of more how I move. It's like, okay, let's get the job done. But then I might pause and go, oh, but yeah, that poetic piece is actually really creative and needed in problem solving. So that's where the two come together. It's like putting on somebody else's shoes and creatively attuning with it, and even thinking about, oh, how is that a gift as well? Even if it's not what I tend to do or do naturally or authentically.
That's fascinating. Is it possible then to combine movement and being in a brave space to help reset or restore the nervous system, or help a person heal from inflammation or stress or disease or any of that?
Well, so that's really where I started when I was first training with both Irmgard Bartenia, who had helped so many people get to walking again with the disease of polio, which was epidemic, the way we're dealing with coronavirus now. I mean, it wasn't life threatening, but it was mobility threatening. People were staying in wheelchairs or later in life coming into wheelchairs and younger than other people. So yes, the answer is yes. This work is profoundly useful. My first story of this was working as I was a college kid. The job I had was a home health aide. Someone had just had a stroke, came back from the hospital, and I was supposed to clean the house and wash the toilets and do a little shopping and that kind of thing. But I was studying all this other stuff about animal movement and baby movement, and recognizing as a dancer that being down on the floor is also great movement. And in the body mind centering work, Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen has developed a theory that correlates different baby movement with different parts of the brain kind of getting turned on, if you will, kind of waking up. And so I used to teach that work. I was kind of one of the master teachers of what we call the nervous system work, or the neurology, or the neuroscience, or the embodiment of the neuroscience and neuroanatomy. So it had to be on off time. And this was kind of before you had to, I wasn't charging money. And I just said, would you like to learn some exercises? And he was up for it. So I would have him lie down on the floor, make a little space, get some towels out and cushion it a little bit, and then start to have him regain different movement options through going, like we call, and again, this is a body mind centering principle, being where you are. So rather than trying to be upright if you're not quite there yet, just go to the level that you are at, which could be seated or on the floor or crawling, and embody it fully, strengthen there. And then, because there is a neuromaturational process, as those neural pathways start to open up again, we can begin to find some more movement choice and strength. So that would be one example.
That's great. If somebody's listening, like if somebody's listening and they just want to live their best life, they want to feel good, and they want to have a good life, what would be your advice for them, or where should they start? How could they do that?
It's funny. Someone asked me like 15, 20 years ago, like, oh, you're a movement expert. What's your advice to everybody? And I said, get a dog. And I actually don't have, I mean, I did have a dog at one point in my life when I lived in Massachusetts, but I live in New York City and I don't have a dog, but I love going outside. And so I would notice that in the bad weather, that the only other people outside, except for an occasional runner, were dog owners. And they're all out, and they're out every day, and they're out 3 times a day. And out is a good thing because you're getting oxygen. But generally, you're walking. Some people are standing around, but standing is better than sitting. So if you have a dog, you're getting oxygen and you're moving. And this is really a good life. It's just oxygenating, keeping your joints mobile. And the simplest level, walking is your very best exercise.
So I have read that owning a dog owners live 10 years longer than non-dog owners on average.
Wow. And I am sure the relational piece is there, but I hadn't read that data. So I'm very glad to have it. Yeah, the relational piece is also important. That you
Love
feel,
helps, right?
right, you feel loved, you feel seen, you have somebody to talk to. Yeah, all of this communication stuff. Yeah.
So if someone wants to learn more about dynamic embodiment or somatic awareness and you and the courses that you teach, where should they go?
So I have two websites that are good starting places. One is drmarthaeddy.com. There was someone else that already had marthaeddy.com. So I went ahead and used my doctorate to help out there. So drmarthaeddy.com is kind of an index page to my various websites. And it does link to dynamicembodiment.org, or you can go straight there. And dynamicembodiment.org is a little bit more about what is dynamic embodiment and what are the certification programs so the two I have is dynamic embodiment, which is to become a somatic movement therapist and or educator. And the other is dance training, because I have gotten through this pandemic by dancing around in my living room with sometimes 389 people. That was the largest class I ever had, and on Zoom. So using these principles and taking them into deep relaxation, somatization, and then using this awareness of the body to get into playful states, but also at some points we would focus on our grief or our sense of anxiety as a group. And again, this is a drop-in class, so it's magic being spun each time the particular people that show up get together. So there's a training to be a teacher to know how to spin that magic using very clear scientific sound foundations and sound movement pedagogy.
Awesome. I will put those in the notes of the show. Hey, Dr. Martha, thank you so much. This has really been great to get to talk to you.
I agree. And I do want to share that if you go to either of those sites, it'll link to it, that my other passion got to be fitness. And I was very much in the fitness world, and went and got my first degree in exercise physiology. So I'm an exercise scientist, and I started off with, training people with Nautilus equipment. And of course I watched it turn to Cybex and different kinds of workouts. And I buy a lot of them and use some of them, but mostly I find dancing really does the trick for me. But I was asked to design an exercise program for first women with cancer, and then eventually it extended to men. So it is what I call a somatic fitness class. And the type of somatic fitness is aerobic. So it's really getting the heart pumping, but gently, because some people are even still in treatment or they're older. And it's called Moving for Life. And movingforlife.org is also free. It's a nonprofit that I started with the help of some great people to be able to get the somatic work and the fitness work out to the public. And that is another type of kind of social justice, health equity.
And that is awesome. Movingforlife.org.
You got it.
Perfect. All right. That is that's in the notes of the show, but now I've said it twice. So the listeners, it's in there.
Yay. Thank you. We want everybody to know about it. It's available to everybody now that we're in, Zoom land, and we do exist on grants from the government and from foundations and individual donations. And basically every person that's been coming to classes, I hope after COVID, we're still going to have the online option. So we're basically doubling in size. And
wow.
So we're growing. Yeah.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Martha.
What a pleasure to meet you. May it all go really well with you. I look forward to listening to more podcasts with you, and maybe see each other in Raleigh, Durham, Greensboro sometime.
That is not far-fetched. We can do it.
All right. Ciao.
Thanks for listening, everyone. Now get outside and play.